legends, I hope you're all fantastic. We're going to do an Axe FX3 Extravaganza today. I want to go through a bunch of presets that I've made, some blocks that I'm going to share, as well as exploring some interesting routing options and going through the base preset I made for the factory preset banks. A lot to get through. We're going to get straight in, and I just want to show, for the people who are wondering, what I actually change in the Leon's Live preset. This is a new factory preset. I basically changed two things. In the output block, I turned the level of scene 2 up by 3 dB. That is mapped to the perform page as solo level, so you can map that to wherever you like it if you're going to go and use this live. It's great having it on the perform page because sometimes 3 dB is just right, sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's not enough depending on the room you're playing in. The other thing I do as well is I just use one of my own cabinet IRs instead of the factory cabs in there, and this is what I use when I go and make filthy guitar music. Basically, scene 1 is my main rhythm sound and scene 2 is my main lead sound. Makes me pull the stank face. I like that a lot. So you can try those out if you want to. All right, a whole bunch of other things to get into. Let's do it. Okay, we'll get started with this preset. This is inspired by the Strymon Dig, which is itself inspired by 80s rack delays. So I guess this is also inspired by 80s rack delays. The Dig does a really unique thing with its series ping pong mode though, and I've set out to replicate that as best I can. So we have a ping pong delay synced to a dotted 8th note, feeding into another ping pong delay synced to a quarter note. And you can see here the spread on this first ping pong is 100% and the spread goes the other way on the second ping pong. I'm then using a send and return block to create another feedback loop. So basically signal's going to come in here, it's going to get ping ponged around, and there's feedback with itself. That feeds into this, which has its own feedback loop, and then I've created another feedback loop over here. I'm using a mixer to blend it in as well. The amp is the band commander. I'm using a York Audio Deluxe Reverb IR, and I have a bit of the JFET compressor on there. Let's just check out what this one sounds like. The way it kind of swims around in stereo is really gorgeous, and this one's great if you just like playing clean chords or volume swells. If you want kind of more master feedback, you can bring up the return level on this feedback return block as well. You have to be really careful with that one though. Anything above 20% and it just starts to get into kind of self-oscillation mode. I like it at about 10%. So that's my attempt at the series ping pong. So this goes kind of hand in hand with that Volante inspired preset I made a little while ago as well. Now the other scenes on here, we get rid of this set of delays here. This is just the straight up Dig modes in here set up. I always kind of use it in stereo in parallel. So this is the ADM delay. What we've got in the delay block for firmware 16.04 is a compander as well as bit reduction and drive in the delay block, and they really help you kind of capture that wonderful gritty character that the Strymon has and that old rack delays have as well. So let's hear this. So that's emulating the ADM mode with the modulation on. We've got the 12-bit mode here, which is my favorite on the Dig, and here as well. This one sounds amazing with some distortion as well. I don't know if I have a distorted amp in here. Alrighty, let's use the blocks library. I'll drop my favorite amp settings in there. Let's go. Love that. There's also a kind of high fidelity 2496 one in there, and for this one I think I'm using the digital stereo. The compander's not on this one, the EQ's wide open, and it just kind of sounds like a really lovely wide stereo delay with modulation. Each of the channels on here is included in my blocks library as well, which I said you can get from the Discord server linked below. Next, let's try a kind of Van Halen inspired like balance FUCK tone. I did a video on this with real amps and the Axe effects. Let's do it all in the Axe effects now. Okay, this patch is basically an adaptation of the early 90s Van Halen inspired video I did earlier in the week. I used my Soldano Hot Rod 50 Plus, an Eventide H3500 for detune, and the Axe effects for delay and reverb. This is the Axe effects only version. Basically what I found was the Solo 88 lead sounds a bit closer to my amp than the Solo 100 based on the Soldano SLO. I just kind of set the knobs in the same places, and it doesn't sound exactly the same, but it sounds pretty good. The whole point again is inspired by, and the idea is to inspire you to play. So we've got that there with the amp block. I'm using a cabinet IR that I made of the same cab I used in the video, different mic mix here, so it does sound a little bit smoother. I've added some preamp emulation and some saturation in the cab block, as well as some low cut and high cut. This is what it sounds like dry. Next, let's add reverb. I'm using the London Plate, ultra high quality because I can. Sounds great at economy settings as well. 15% mix, 2 seconds of reverb, we get there. Now the real magic, adding the pitch detune. I'm actually using dual chromatic rather than dual detune. It just kind of gives you a little bit more control than dual detune, but 9 cents either side. The delays I've matched by ear, about 8 milliseconds and 30 milliseconds to kind of make up for any latency, because I went out of the Axe effects, into the Eventide, back into the Axe effects again, and I think this sounds pretty wicked, and this is where the real grease comes in. It makes me do this face, it must be good. The fourth scene adds some delay. So these are the actual delay settings that I used in the video. It's vintage digital, 300 milliseconds of delay, and then a 75 millisecond offset on the right channel. Again, it's blended in parallel. I've got the level at about -9 dB. Well, it's exactly -9 dB. This is what we get with some delay added in there. That's a whole lot of fun. And to kind of closer match the old Roland delays in there, in the delay block, there's this new compander. So I've actually used a bit of drive on the delays. I've used the bit reduction to bring it down to a 12-bit delay. And I found these settings kind of match the Roland rack unit that I have. I have the SDE 1000, Eddie used the 3000s. As I understand it, basically identical units except for the maximum amount of delay time and what you can save on them. So we've got this compander in there. Let's hear it without and then with. Very, very subtle, but I do like the way that sounds right there. And then the kind of icing on the cake is to just change the cab block to channel B and pan it 50% to the left. And then we kind of have that sound that I had at the end of the video. It's so much fun. I will post this preset and the cab on Exchange for you all to try. Next, I want to go through a new factory preset that I made. It's called Leon's Djent bass, but it's an all-around kind of modern multi-band bass preset. So you can get a bass distortion sound that's not super flubby. It's still nice and tight and punchy in the low end, but it has a whole bunch of grit for modern bass styles. Let's check that out. Okay, I've only made one change from the factory preset here. I've replaced the input block with a looper. So here's one I've prepared earlier, a nice clean active bass DI so that I don't have to play bass. Let's just hear the first 4 scenes and then we'll hear scene 1 in context with some drums. Let's go. Now, if you're not used to this sort of bass guitar tone, you might be sitting there thinking, this doesn't sound like bass, so let's hear it with drums. It makes a whole lot more sense. So the core idea is to split the raw DI into 3 different bands. I'm using filter blocks to do that. So this particular filter block here, low cut at 65, high cut at 250. This is just going to be the clean sounding low end. I'm then processing that with another compressor, a drive, a parametric EQ, and a cab. The mid-range band, frequencies from 250 to 1500. You can see here a drive, a guitar amp, the Triple Crest 2, which I think sounds fantastic on bass, another parametric EQ, and a pair of cab IRs, and then our high band from 1500 to about 6400 hertz. Another one of these black glass 7K distortions going into another guitar amp and another parametric EQ and the same cab. You can see before each of the filters, I'm also compressing the raw bass DI. These 2 compressors here are basically exactly the same. I'm just compressing the low end a lot harder with the ratio set to 7 because I want a big, tight, clean, punchy low end, and I want to blend it with a kind of nice beefy mid-range and a really clicky top end on there. So what I can do here, the filter block bypass modes are all set to mute. So I can play you that DI and I can just play the low end or just the mid-range and just the high end. This is really interesting to hear how this kind of recipe comes together. So let's just do that. So the general thinking is if you were to just distort all of the bass, you'd get a really flubby, kind of unusable low end. You'd also get a lot of harsh artifacts if you were playing with a pick from using bass distortion. So doing it this way means we can use the guitar amp and this Black Glass 7K here to kind of get the nice big beefy body in there. We can also have the really tight punchy low end that's just using a JFET compressor. I'm using this distortion pedal as a stand-in for an amp block, so it's just basically acting like a clean preamp. There's a parametric EQ and this factory 4x10 cab impulse on here. You could get rid of the drive and the cab and just use this as a purely clean compressed DI for the bottom end. That works pretty well, but I like it with the cab and the drive in there. And then the mid-range, because you don't have all that excess low end or high end, you can kind of get it nice and warm and full. And then the high end using this parametric EQ back here, which I'm actually going to play this just so you can hear the effect of that PEQ. It's going to get rid of a lot of just disgusting, ugly frequencies from there. So let's hear that. So while it does seem complicated, the general idea is pretty straightforward. Then for the second, third, and fourth scenes, I'm adding a drive block up here with the mix not at 100%. So for scene 1, it's a Black Glass 7K. The mix is at 65%, and there's also a graphic EQ back here just to kind of add some 1 and 2K and pull out a bit of 250. I should mention as well, I've got a multi-band comp at the back here with the low crossover as low as it goes and the high crossover as high as it goes, so it can act as a general kind of parallel compressor. The mix is at 50% here. So let's just go through this. It'll be interesting to just hear the effect of the graphic EQ on scene 1. Then we can bring in the drive, then we can hear the other pedals. I think I've used a rat and a fuzz again with the mix. I think on the rat it's at 50% and for the fuzz it's at about 30%, just to get a different vibe going on for different styles. So this is what the graphic EQ does. Then I'm gonna show you what each of the different drives does. And you can see going really easy with the mix on the fuzz there. If you go too high with it, it just kind of obliterates any semblance of, you know, non-mush, put it that way. I've also added a reverb block back here because sometimes you want a bit of reverb on your bass. I know it sounds crazy. Now, if I get rid of the looper block on here and replace it with the input block has the output level mapped to the perform page in here. So you can see here it's called master input trim. So if you're using a passive bass, just basically crank that all the way up. And you can see on scene 5, the input block is actually on channel B over here. And I've got the output level cranked up by 12 dB. And I've got a cable plugged in like an absolute genius, so you can hear a bit of fizz right there. But that's the general idea with that entire preset. It looks complicated, but you can use it, I guess, as a starting point for your own multi-band bass tones. That was very much the idea with this, but I think as we heard with that clip, you can also just kind of fire it up and tweak your input levels and you've got a really lovely, modern, dirty bass tone to work with. This particular preset's inspired by an algorithm on the Eventide H3500 called Mod Factory 2. And what Mod Factory 2 just gives you is a bunch of building blocks to kind of bake your own algorithms. And we can do that way easier on the Axe effects. And this is just replicating something I was playing around with on Mod Factory 2. It took me maybe 3 minutes as opposed to 15 minutes to program it in. Again, Axe Edit, it's just magic. It makes the workflow so much easier. But what on earth is happening here? This entire middle row is just a clean sound with some reverb, so don't worry too much about that. But you can see I'm using a digital mono delay with no feedback, but I'm creating its own feedback line. But see this send over here, feedback send number 1? That's not returning over here, it's returning up here. And similarly, send to comes down to feedback send number 2. So this is all cross feedback. What I've put in the feedback path is I've put a dual detune with only one detune voice. And this particular detune here, you can see is modulating. I've got an LFO attached to it, so it's going from about -11 to -9 cents of detune. And I have the kind of opposite happening over here. We've got LFO 1A, so these two LFOs are out of phase. This one's going from about 8 to 13 cents of detune. And basically what happens is this, you play a note and it'll come down to one of these delays, and then it will get sent through a detuner and another delay, and then it will get sent basically through like the opposite detune. So the detunes kind of cancel one another out, almost cancel one another out like every second time through or something like that. But the end result is you get this kind of really wide stereo detune pan thing. I should stop talking about it and I should actually play it for you so you can hear it. I love the way that sounds. There's a few variations on it. This one is I've called a circular detune delay. You can see the delay here is set at 500 milliseconds, and this one's 250 milliseconds. And because it's only cross feedback, what is it like? You're gonna have 250 one side, 500 the other, then they'll both sound at the same time. So it'll sound like it's coming out of the middle. This one's wild. Beautiful stuff. I think the first scene as well, it's actually just taking delays and it's modulating them. Yeah, I'm using LFO2 plus LFO1. This is really interesting. So we're actually using two LFOs, and the first LFO is a sine and the second LFO is a triangle. So we're kind of blending these two LFO shapes on there. I've just called it DIY chorus, and it sounds like this. What on earth is happening with these pitch blocks? Okay, we still have the same like detune that's modulating as well. So it's an interesting take on a chorus right there. I think there's another scene in here. What do we have happening here? So we have 500 milliseconds of delay here, 375 milliseconds. So like a quarter note dotted eighth note thing, again, with these same detuners placed in the cross feedback paths. This is all super nerdy, but I love the way it sounds. All up, I really hope this provides some inspiration and some kind of fresh preset ideas for your Axe FX 3. Like I said, I will post all of these presets and blocks on my Discord server and on AxeChange where relevant. I'm going to play you all out with my single cut, the Boogie Mark IV model on here, and that detuned delay. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, there's links in the video description. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Stay safe, be good to one another. I'll see you all next time.